An appetite for risk. So how many people here would say they would rather be non-consensus if they're right? Assuming you're right. See, by assuming I'm right, I've taken away the risk, right? Because I've assumed you're right. Who wants to be non-consensus if you're right? Really? Okay, yeah, because otherwise that means I'm going to be, yeah. So it looks like, now, what's the advantage of being non-consensus if I'm right? Right, you're right at the end, which is intrinsically, it's, I mean, yeah. I mean, there's that aspect of it, right? So you feel like, yes! But also, you take the market? Is that what I heard you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right. The non-consensus idea is very valuable, right? I mean, it's incredibly valuable. Everybody knows that Qualcomm gets a lot of intellectual property payments for CDMA technology. Okay. Now, you realize when Qualcomm first came out, this is a wireless technology, so don't worry if you aren't into this. And you wouldn't have heard of it much in Europe because the European Commission doesn't allow CDMA technology much into the market. I mean, there's a variant that's allowed now under WCDMA and so forth, for those of you who know the market. But in the early days, Qualcomm's technology was thought to violate the laws of physics. And so Irwin Jacobs and his team was one of the few groups that was doing research on CDMA. Well, it turns out he was right. In fact, it's especially useful in a wireless system that moves data. Now, way back in the early 90s, when the decision was made that CDMA should be not allowed into Europe, it didn't matter because text messages didn't need much data. By the year 2000, 2001, 2002, this started being a problem. So there's a huge amount of money now going to Qualcomm in payment to all that intellectual property that they amassed because they were nonconformist, but they were right. Now, there are other cases where the nonconformist doesn't work out, but the point is that often the payments to the... So I have a very technical symbol for this quadrant. Okay, so that's a great place to be. That's a great place to be. Now, what if we're consensus and right? How's that outcome? That's okay, right? At least we're right. But we're all right. Right, you don't make as much money. When we're all right, we're all there. Right, so if you open your bar, and there's 50 other bars on that street, and they all have the same mojo that you put, or I'm not quite sure how that translates, but they all have the same image and feel as your establishment, at the same level of service, and there's no difference, then maybe, yeah, you're right, but you're all right. So it's, I mean, it's not a bad thing. What if you're wrong? Where do you want to be if you're wrong? Consensus. Oh, of course. Yeah, if I'm wrong, I mean, when you find out you're wrong, what's the first thing you do? You find out if everybody else is wrong too, right? That is exactly what you do. That is exactly what you do. You get your score back on the examination that I'm going to give you in 10 minutes. No, I'm not going to give you an exam. But if I did, you get your score back and you say, can I ask for the distribution? I want to know where I stand on the distribution, right? The score has no meaning to me. I don't want to know about absolutes. I want to know if relative to all the other humans, I want to know if I'm alone, right? I mean, it's not anything to be ashamed of. We don't want to be alone if we're wrong. If we're wrong, we want to have everybody be wrong. Because there's no worse feeling than to be wrong and be alone. Right? Because that is the definition of a fool. I mean, seriously. Seriously, and we kind of laugh about it now, and I don't mean it as a joke, right? I mean, this is what a fool is. I mean, you think about the costs here. The economy is down, and you have some idea. And then you go home in a few months, right? And you're talking to the person you love, and you explain to him or her, and you say, so it turns out I was wrong. Right? I mean, I failed. And we have nothing. This is a very difficult conversation, right? I mean, what does he say back to you? What does she say back to you? He said, everybody knew you were wrong. You had so much at stake. Everything. And everybody told you were wrong, and you're wrong. You're wrong. We knew you were wrong. It's the definition of a fool to be here. This is not a good place to be. This is the worst experience of your life. They all said, that's Don Quixote, right? I mean, they said you were wrong, and you're wrong, and now you have failed. Right? So one of the first ideas that we have to get clear when it comes to competitiveness is that the fear of being wrong among people is much greater than the hope for being a genius. Right? Because this is a genius. Oh my gosh, Irwin Jacobs, 20 years of research, and he turns out to be right. I mean, not only do you get rich, you're a genius. Right? You're a genius. Nobody cares about your bad days once you do that. Right? I mean, nobody reads Einstein's bad papers. Oh, I know, he came up with the general theory, but look at this lousy paper he published in. No, once you're a genius, now you're made forever. Right? You were non-consensus and right. What a great upside. But the tendency in organizations is to go consensus because people know about this. And people fear this. Your people fear this. You want to be competitive, but your people are going to be too embarrassed to admit Evena's idea. They suffer from Evena's, what I called problem. You obviously don't suffer from the problem because you talked about it. Right? It took you a few seconds, but you were on the spot and you had to talk about it. Right? And Ivna is doing this, even though most people would come over here and do something more consensus. Being an entrepreneur is, by definition, non-consensus. Because as soon as you're an entrepreneur, even though people know what a bar is, right? And so, but you have a very unique definition of this. You didn't want to say bar. You had kind of a, you weren't going to distill. You're not going to just serve. It's going to be tourism. It's probably got, some interesting, you used the word capabilities, I think, to begin. Were you the capabilities person? Who said capabilities when we started off? Yeah, you said, that's what I thought. Yeah, so when I said capability, you didn't light up at that, so I didn't know you. Yeah, right, so you said capabilities because that sounds more, sort of like business talk. But when you're talking about capabilities, you're really talking about providing service and an image and something very attractive so the tourists, they go there, they look for that place. Maybe the high-end tourism organizations seek you out and try to make sure that the high-end tourists all go there and it's a place to be seen and all this is going on, right? That's your hope. But do you realize how many people would not do that out of fear that they be wrong? Because you may fail, right? You may fail. There's a huge risk involved. And so the appetite for risk is great. So one of the first things that comes up in competitiveness is understanding that innovation and entrepreneurship is all about the human reluctance to be a fool. That's really what it's about. Established firms are constantly battling conventional wisdom and the conservative bias that people have. Think about people in your organizations right now. Everybody knows about what's going on in the economy, and nobody wants to come home and have that conversation that I just, imitated. Everybody's really conservative, right? Well, you go back to your work after you come to this program and they say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. The boss went to a program. Because if the boss goes to a program, he or she could come back with some crazy ass ideas that could cause problems, right? Right? I mean, this is going to be hard actually. When do people, like, especially if you use lingo, I try not to use business talk. But if you start using the business talk, people get a big kick out of that. They say, oh, the boss is full of all sorts of this. It'll go away, right? Hopefully, they're hoping it'll go away. You'll come back, you'll calm down, you'll get over it. There's a tremendous conservative thing going on in your firms. So we come here and talk about being competitive, and the folks back in your office just want to make sure they survive because nobody wants to be a fool. Nobody wants to be a fool. It's one of the very first kind of concerns we have about competitiveness, right? Is that it's an idea that both me and Dan Leventhal next week will be talking about. Is the idea that sometimes we want to explore for new ideas. And the exploration for new ideas requires that we be willing to take this risk, that we be willing to do something that is non-consensus. And it's very rare to see examples of that.